If you're trying to build a website in 2026, one of the biggest decisions that you'll make is choosing your CMS. And honestly, it's more confusing than ever. With so many no-code website design tools now on the market, making our lives so much easier, the decision is no longer obvious, but instead between several fantastic offerings. You've got traditional platforms, visual builders, headless systems, AI-powered tools, and they all claim to be the best. So in this video, I'm breaking down the best CMS platforms of 2026, who they're actually for, and which one I would choose depending on the situation. And just quickly, this video is sponsored by Framer, who we'll talk about properly in just a second. So let's start with what a CMS actually is in 2026. A CMS, or content management system, is essentially how you create, manage, and publish content on your website without needing to code everything from scratch. It's a fast way to use a table-based data store for repeated content on your website. For example, a blog. A blog CMS is a collection of blog posts, titles, descriptions, and images that your website can pull from to dynamically display this content across your site. A CMS is a speedy way to display content consistently without relying on code. But in 2026, it goes a bit further than that. Most modern CMS platforms now support dynamic filtering, conditional visibility, and live content updates. So instead of just displaying content, you can actually control how content behaves. You can filter blog posts by categories, tags, or authors in real time. You can show or hide sections depending on the content inside your CMS. And you can even create fully dynamic pages that scale automatically as you add more items. And this is where CMS becomes less of a content tool and more of a system that powers your entire website. But the key shift we've seen over the last few years is this. CMS platforms are no longer just back-end dashboards. They're now full design tools, full development environments, and in some cases, full business platforms, which means choosing the right one isn't just about the content anymore. It's about your workflow, flexibility, scalability, and how you actually want to build. So what worked for one site may be a total problem for another. And for most people, scale is a big part of that decision. Some CMS platforms are amazing for small to medium sites, but start to struggle when you need thousands or even tens of thousands of items. So that's something to keep in mind as we go through these. So let's get into it. First up, and probably the most well-known, WordPress. Now, WordPress is still absolutely everywhere. It powers a huge portion of the internet, and for good reason. It's flexible, it's powerful, and there are thousands of plugins and themes that let you build almost anything. You can bolt on e-commerce, memberships, SEO tools, analytics, pretty much anything you need. But here's the reality in 2026. That flexibility comes at a cost. Now, this does depend on how your site is built, but performance can suffer. Security, in particular, becomes your responsibility, and managing those plugins, keeping them up to date, and making sure they're compatible quickly can become overwhelming, and it's especially a big hurdle for new users. Pricing-wise, WordPress itself is free, but hosting, plugins, and developer time can begin to add up. So while it's still a great option for complex and content-heavy sites or very specific setups, for most creators and businesses, there are now kind of simpler, faster, and more predictable alternatives. Next up, Webflow. Webflow really pushed the industry forward. For a large portion of my career as a web designer and developer, Webflow remained the tool of choice, my sole tool of choice, and for good reason. It introduced the idea that you could visually design a website while still having full control over the structure, over the responsiveness, and user interactions. When it first launched, it was one of the first, if not the only, no-code tool of its type out there. And its CMS is still one of the most structured and powerful visual CMS systems out there. But one area that Webflow really stands out in is its entire ecosystem, and in particular, the amount of education available. So Webflow University, all the way through to its community of tutorials and templates, is a really useful resource for not just Webflow developers, but new developers generally. They provide a wealth of information on how to set your content up correctly for AI search engines, and there's just a huge amount of support to help you learn to build. That said, there is a reason for this. There's a much steeper learning curve for Webflow than several of the kind of new and modern options. It's much closer to designing in code than people expect, and for beginners it really can feel overwhelming. Where Webflow started out as a visual coding tool, meaning you created your sites using a visual editor, but it still pulled all the same strings as custom code, it's still very embedded in the old ways of coding websites. So for developers who can code, they'll absolutely fly through this. The learning curve for those people with Webflow is going to be hugely faster than with designers. But the pricing does also reflect the power that Webflow provides. As your CMS grows and as your site begins to scale, costs can increase depending on your plan and your item limits. So bear in mind you will want to keep an eye on that. So Webflow sits in this interesting space where it's incredibly powerful, but it's not always the fastest or simplest to get started with. Now let's talk about one of the biggest shifts in how people are building websites in 2026. And that's thanks to platforms like Framer. I think it's safe to say that Framer has completely changed the game, not just when it comes to what a CMS can feel like, but web design on the whole. Instead of separating design and content, everything happens in one place. You're designing visually, you're building responsively, and your CMS is directly connected to your layouts in a way that just makes sense. And this is where it really stands out: speed. You can go from an idea to a live website incredibly quickly without sacrificing on design quality. But what's really interesting in 2026 is how much Framer keeps evolving. They're constantly shipping new features. And more importantly, they're listening to their community. Things like dynamic filtering inside of CMS lists, better collection organization, and more control over how your content is displayed, all without adding complexity. You can build things like filtered blog pages, portfolio systems, or resource libraries, and you can do all of this without touching a line of code. And for most creators, that's exactly what you want. The CMS itself is simple, structured, and actually enjoyable to use, which sounds like a small thing, but if you've ever fought with clunky CMS dashboards, you'll know how big a deal that really is. With Framer, pricing is also relatively straightforward compared to sort of more traditional setups. You're not managing your hosting separately, you're not stacking plugins. Everything is kind of bundled into one platform. It's also worth mentioning that Framer is one of the few platforms that genuinely feels like it's built for modern workflows, especially if you're a designer or a creator or just someone building your brand online. So if you want something that balances ease of use, performance, and high-end design, I'd say Framer is easily one of the best CMS platforms right now. Now, before we move on, there's one platform that deserves a special mention, especially when it comes to scale, and that's Wix Studio. Wix Studio sits in a really interesting position in 2026. It combines a visual builder approach with the ability to handle much larger and much more complex CMS structures. If you're working on, say, enterprise scale projects, directories, or sites with huge datasets, then this is where Wix Studio really does stand out. Its CMS can handle significantly larger collections compared to some of the other builders, and it gives you some fantastic control when working with those bigger, more structured projects. It's also got some really strong collaboration tools, which is also true of Framer and Webflow. It just makes it really useful for teams rather than just individuals, which again, I think across the board at the moment is being reflected really, really well. So while it might not always feel fast or as design focused as Framer, Wix Studio is definitely great if you are prioritizing scale and dealing with a project that could, at some point along the line, scale far beyond just sort of a few hundred or potentially a few thousand items. Next up, we're going to look at Shopify. If you're building anything e-commerce, Shopify is still the king. Its CMS is built specifically around products, collections, and content sales. And to be honest, that focus is exactly why it works so well. Everything is optimized for conversion. Everything is structured around selling, and it also handles a lot of the complexity for you, which also means there's a little bit less customization available. But that also means that payments, inventory, shipping, and taxes are all built into an e-commerce based CMS, all built in out the box. So while it's not necessarily the most flexible CMS in terms of, say, design freedom, if your goal is to run an online store, it's one of the easiest and most reliable ways to do it. And then we have the more technical route, headless CMS platforms like Contentful. Headless CMS separates your content from your front end, which means developers can pull content into any framework, any platform, and any experience. It's incredibly powerful, and it scales extremely well. You can manage huge amounts of structured content across multiple platforms, say websites, apps, internal tools, all from one place. But it comes with a big trade-off, and that's complexity. You'll almost always need developers. You'll need hosting, front-end frameworks, and ongoing maintenance to make this work. And if we're being honest, that's not something that most creators or business owners need or want to be thinking about. It's built for teams, for scale, and for custom applications. So unless you really know that you need it, the chances are you probably don't. So back to the big question, which CMS is actually the best in 2026? And here's the honest answer. There is not one single best option, but there definitely is a best for you and for your project. If you're building something that's content heavy or highly customized, then WordPress still definitely has its place in 2026. If you want deep control and structured design, Webflow is definitely a strong option for you. If your focus is an online store, if you're running an e-commerce business, Shopify is without a doubt the obvious choice for you. If you need to scale far beyond the normal item limits of most CMS offerings, then Wix Studio is a serious contender. But if you want the best balance of speed, design, simplicity, and a modern workflow with potentially the lowest learning curve, then platforms like Framer are definitely leading the way right now. And that's really the shift that we're seeing. The best CMS in 2026 is not the one with, say, the most features. It's the one that gets out of your way and lets you build faster. So if you want to give Framer a try, I've left a link in the description. And if you're building your own site this year, I genuinely recommend starting there. As always, if you found this video helpful, please do subscribe for more content on web design, building your brand, and creating a better online presence. And I shall see you in the next video.